First, I want to get into maybe a little bit of your background with children's books and some of the creative process. So first things first, what number children's book is this for you?
I think this is number 10 or 11. One of those two numbers is right. But yeah, it's a good solid 10. I've done very good in terms of publishing children's books. It's a very hard industry to break into, you know. It's harder to get children's books published than it is to get adult nonfiction books published. And the reason is that there's so much more competition. So many people out there think they have great ideas for children's books, and many of them do. So the rate of submissions to publishers is much higher for children's books. So consequently, you know, the chances are just less that you will get a book published. But I've been very fortunate, very blessed in this regard. And the reason why I always wanted to write children's books really had to do with my belief that we are in the middle of a cultural war here. I've always believed that there's a battle over ideology and economics and religion and culture and morality and even our own history. And I've been very aware of that for many years. And I know that those who are against Christians and our Christian traditional family values oftentimes try to jump over the parents and get to the children. You know, they try to do all kinds of things to use propaganda to influence children. And I think that it's part of being a good Christian to make sure that our kids are educated and that nobody gets to them first, you know. To me, it's part of my mission in general to evangelize the culture.
I think you really connected on something that is definitely true, and that is he who influences, I don't know if I want to use the word controls, but he who influences the children definitely influences the future of a state, a nation, a world, if you will. What goes into our children's hearts and minds is certainly very important. And, you know, from a marketing perspective, I would also comment on, in terms of children's books, I think one of the things that is so challenging is you have to think about it through the lens of you have two different audiences, because the children are the ones who are, in the end, sort of consuming or receiving the content, especially if somebody else is reading it to them. But generally, the children are not the ones who are out buying a book. So you also have to produce something that's going to ride this interesting fence where it's got to appeal to the parents and the grandparents or the aunts and uncles, whoever is going to buy the book. But it also, at the same time, has to appeal to the children as well. So children's publishing is a whole animal all into itself.
And you know, you nailed it right on the head. It's the adults who buy the books. So you have to appeal to them. But it's sort of a beautiful catch-22. You have to write something that's appealing to adults too. But that's terrific because you want to evangelize them too. You want them to get the message. There's no greater feeling in the world to me than when an adult comes and says to me, you know, I was reading this book to my grandson, and wow, it made me think of something I hadn't thought of before. It made me see things in a whole different light, and it knocked me between the eyes or something, or it made me cry or something. So you have to be aware that the older siblings and the aunts and uncles and grandparents are the ones that are going to be reading these books to the children, and you want to get them too. So what I try to do is I try to write books that are entertaining for children and that children will understand the main baseline message. But at the same time, I try to write books that have a deeper meaning, that are layered with meaning and have quite a bit of symbolism sometimes, so that the adults reading the books will get something out of the books as well.
Yeah, I think some of the best children's books are the ones that have those special Easter eggs, if you will, for the adults. When I start smiling about something that my kids don't even pick up on, I feel like the author has accomplished that extra goal while they were putting the book together. I don't get to talk to, like I said earlier, many children's books authors, at least about their children's books. Some of them are dual genre authors like yourself, but I'd love to hear a little bit about where does the process for you begin creatively? Maybe contrast, how does it look different for you to be starting a children's book project versus one of your other nonfiction books that are geared more towards adults?
Well, it's a very, very good question. You know, nonfiction books are harder to write. You have to do a lot of research. You have to really scope out the book and put it together like an architecture. You know, you really have to plan out everything in advance. And there's a lot of hard work to write a chapter, much less a book. Children's books in many ways are easier, but in some ways are harder to write. And I'll explain. The actual writing of a children's book can be very enjoyable. For instance, my books are rhyming books, and it's a lot of fun when I have a good idea to walk around the house, pace, and try to come up with fun, enjoyable rhymes. It's a fun process. It's not so hard. It's not like drilling down into stone like it is when you write an adult book. But where it's difficult is coming up with a great original idea. an idea that hasn't been done before, an idea that, as we were just talking about, appeals not only to children but adults too. That's the hard part, coming up with a really tremendous idea. Once you do that, though, and once you roll it around in your mind for a few months, the actual writing of the book is, as I said, very enjoyable. So usually I'll be reading scripture or something like that. I'll be reading the Bible and I'll come across some quote that has an animal in it, let's say. When I wrote the book, The Donkey That No One Could Ride, which is my most well-known Easter children's book, I was just reading about the entry of Jesus into Jerusalem riding on a donkey that no one had ridden before. And of course, we know the reason why no one had ridden it before is because it was put aside for a sacred purpose to carry the King of Kings into Jerusalem. But I thought to myself, gee, wouldn't it be interesting to write a book about that little donkey and why no one had ever rode it before? So I'll be reading scripture, I'll see an animal or I'll see something, and it'll trigger my mind, and I'll say, well, maybe that would be a good children's story. And then I'll roll it around in my head for a few months trying to come up with the main ideas before I finally do sit down and start to write it.
Well, in addition to, I think, great rhyming text, I mean, I really love children's books that have kind of a wonderful rhythm and a cadence to them as you're reading. I feel like it just makes it a lot more fun to read. And also, in terms of the phrasing, I feel like it often makes some of it easier for kids to remember, just because that rhyming, that repetition of it all, I think helps them to get the information solidified in their brains, especially if it's some truths or some principles that they should take with them for the long haul. But the other side of the children's book journey is pairing the words with fantastic artwork. And in The Grumpy Old Ox, you actually work with an illustrator that you've worked with before. So tell us a little bit about Richard's work and how that complements what we see in this brand new book.
Yes, Richard Cowdery is a New York Times best-selling artist. He's worked on various series of books that have, sold mega millions, like Marnie and Me and Fiona the Hippo. Those are secular books, even though he's an evangelical Christian. So I've worked with him on about 5 or 6 books in the past, and one of them is The Donkey That No One Could Ride. Another is The Sheep That No One Could Find, Roxy the Ritzy Camel, various books. And the reason why I use Richard is because he's the best artist in the world when it comes to animals, when it comes to giving animals human expressions, human features. Because after all, Shaun, these books, they make use of animals, but they're really about people. The reason why we use animal characters is because animals are less intimidating to children. Adults oftentimes are figures of authority, as they well should be. But an animal is adorable and cute, and so you could make a point with an animal. They're more approachable. And so a child can learn very deep truths in a very easy, enjoyable, entertaining way. And as I said, Richard is the best in the world at doing these animals. He makes these animals come to life. He even makes a character like the Grumpy Old Ox, the main character in this book, who's supposed to be grumpy and mean and angry. He even makes that character endearing. So he's just very, very gifted at what he does.